It's June 12, 1987. An American president is about to give a speech in the shadow of a monument that once celebrated victory, but is now trapped in a no-man's land of barbed wire and guard towers. The city is Berlin, a place carved in two by the scars of history. For 40 years, the air here has been thick with tension, a friction between two worlds, two ideologies, fighting for the future of humanity. The president is Ronald Reagan, and the speech in his pocket contains a line so direct, so provocative, that his own team fears it could shatter a fragile peace and plunge the world into an even more dangerous phase of the Cold War. General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. It was a direct challenge, delivered just yards from a heavily fortified border, a line his own advisors begged him to take out. So how did this one moment of defiance become a rallying cry that helped topple an empire? How did these 6 words, spoken in front of a concrete scar, energize a movement and write the final act of the Cold War? This is the story of how a single speech became a catalyst for freedom. To feel the weight of those words, you have to understand the world they were spoken into. By 1987, the Cold War had been the backdrop for everything for 40 years. After World War II, Europe was split. In the West, you had a bloc of democratic nations led by the United States. In the East, a collection of states controlled by the Soviet Union. The dividing line was called the Iron Curtain, and nowhere was that curtain more real or more brutal than in Berlin. Even though it was deep inside Soviet-controlled East Germany, Berlin itself was also divided. Its western half was an island of freedom and capitalism in a sea of communism. For years, this island was a magnet for anyone trying to escape the oppression and economic misery of the East. A constant brain drain of skilled workers and intellectuals flowed from east to west. By 1961, the East German regime, with Moscow's blessing, decided they'd had enough. In the dead of night on August 13th, they started building a wall. And it wasn't just a wall, it was a fortress. What started as a barbed wire fence grew into a terrifying system of control. The East German government cynically called it the anti-faschistische Schutzwall, or anti-fascist protection rampart, claiming it was to keep spies out. But everyone knew its real purpose, to keep its own people in. The Berlin Wall stretched over 96 miles. It was made of concrete slabs nearly 12 feet high, topped with a smooth pipe to make it almost impossible to climb. Behind it lay a death strip, a wide-open area with soft sand to show footprints, floodlights, attack dogs, tripwire machine guns, and over 300 watchtowers with guards who had orders to shoot to kill. It was, as Reagan would call it, a gash that cut a city, a country, and a continent in two. Standing before the Brandenburg Gate, a monument to peace now stranded in this dead zone, was a constant, painful reminder of this scar on the face of humanity. Life on the eastern side was a world of suffocating control. The secret police, the Stasi, was one of the most effective and invasive in history. With a massive network of agents and informants, some historians estimate there was one informant for every 6 or 7 citizens, the Stasi created a culture of pure paranoia. Friends spied on friends, neighbors on neighbors. The Stasi steamed open tens of thousands of letters every day. They infiltrated every part of life, using blackmail and psychological warfare to crush any sign of dissent. This was the system the wall was built to protect. Into this world stepped 2 men who would define the era. In America, there was Ronald Reagan. A former actor known as the Great Communicator, Reagan had a deep, unshakable belief that freedom was morally superior. He'd thrown out the old policy of détente, or easing tensions, and instead chose a strategy of peace through strength. He wasn't afraid to call the Soviet Union an evil empire, believing that communism was a bizarre chapter in human history whose last pages are even now being written. Meanwhile, in Moscow, a new kind of leader had emerged. Mikhail Gorbachev took over in 1985, and he knew the Soviet system was rotting from the inside. He introduced two game-changing policies: glasnost, or openness, which allowed for more freedom of expression, and perestroika, a restructuring of the Soviet system. Gorbachev was a reformer, but he was trying to save communism, not end it. The West saw him as a man they could work with, a hope for a less tense future. It was the dynamic between these two men, the staunch anti-communist and the Soviet reformer, that set the stage for what was about to happen in Berlin. The occasion was the 750th anniversary of Berlin. The location was chosen for maximum impact, right in front of the Brandenburg Gate, a symbol of both German history and its painful division. From the podium, Reagan could see the wall and the East German guards, and more importantly, his voice, blasted from loudspeakers, would carry over the barrier to the people of East Berlin. The job of writing the speech went to a young speechwriter, Peter Robinson. Robinson flew to Berlin to get a feel for the city. But the American diplomats he met with all told him the same thing: don't poke the bear, don't make a big deal about the wall. They said West Berliners were used to it, that it was just a part of life. Rocking the boat would only cause trouble and could undermine Gorbachev. But that night, Robinson had dinner with a group of regular West Berliners, and they told him a very different story. They were not used to the wall. They talked about the heartbreak of being cut off from family just a few miles away. Then the hostess, a woman named Ingeborg Els, said something that hit Robinson like a lightning bolt. "If this man Gorbachev is serious with his talk of glasnost and perestroika," she said, "he can prove it by getting rid of this wall." That simple, powerful idea became the heart of the speech. Robinson knew he had to use it. It was the truth. It was what the people of Berlin really felt. He went back to Washington and wrote the draft. Right in the middle, he put in the challenge: "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." The pushback from inside the administration was immediate and fierce. The State Department and the National Security Council were appalled. For weeks, a war was waged over those 6 words. Top officials, including Chief of Staff Howard Baker and Deputy National Security Advisor Colin Powell, argued the line was too aggressive, too unpresidential. They thought it was a cheap shot that would embarrass Gorbachev and risk the important arms control talks they had going. Why risk real progress for a bit of rhetorical flair? But Robinson, with support from other White House aides, wouldn't back down. And critically, the line had a fan in Ronald Reagan himself. While some accounts credit others in the administration with pushing for the line, Reagan saw it in the draft and instantly understood its power. The wall, to him, was the ultimate symbol of tyranny. Calling for its removal was simply stating the obvious. The pressure kept coming, right up to the day of the speech. On the flight to Berlin, the State Department sent yet another version of the speech, with the line cut out. It was ignored. In the car on the way to the gate, Reagan turned to his Deputy Chief of Staff, Ken Duberstein. Knowing full well the storm his words were about to cause, he said with a smile, "The boys at State are going to kill me, but it's the right thing to do." At 2 p.m., shielded by bulletproof glass, Ronald Reagan walked to the podium. He knew his real audience was listening on the other side of the wall. "To those listening in East Berlin," he said, "a special word. Although I cannot be with you, I address my remarks to you just as surely as to those standing here before me." He contrasted the two Berlins, the West's economic miracle versus the communist world's failure, technological backwardness, declining standards of health. He said, "Freedom leads to prosperity. Freedom replaces the ancient hatreds among the nations. Freedom is the victor." He acknowledged Gorbachev's new policies, but then put them to the test. Are these the beginnings of profound changes in the Soviet state? Or are they token gestures intended to raise false hopes in the West? And then he delivered the challenge. His voice wasn't shouting. It was firm, measured, and filled with moral clarity. "We welcome change and openness. There is one sign the Soviets can make that would be unmistakable, that would advance dramatically the cause of freedom and peace. He paused, looking at the gate. General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Another pause. The crowd roared. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate! Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall! The cheers were deafening. The 6 words that almost didn't make it had been spoken. The gauntlet had been thrown. The immediate reaction wasn't exactly what you'd expect. In fact, it was pretty muted. The critics inside the Reagan administration felt like they'd been proven right. The Soviet news agency TASS called the speech openly provocative and war-mongering. Some Western media outlets just shrugged. It seemed to many diplomats like a piece of political theater that had annoyed the Soviets and achieved nothing. Gorbachev himself later said they were not really impressed. And the wall didn't come down. Not that day, not that year. For a while it seemed like the skeptics were right. They were just words, but they were wrong. The speech wasn't a magic spell. It was a catalyst. It didn't start the fire for democracy in Eastern Europe, but it poured gasoline on the embers. For the next 2.5 years, the pressure built. Reagan's challenge had set a clear, simple goal. The wall was no longer a permanent fixture to be managed. It was a scar to be removed. The speech gave a huge morale boost to democracy movements across the Eastern Bloc. In Poland, the solidarity movement grew stronger. In Hungary, reformers started to test the limits of Soviet power. The very ideas of glasnost and perestroika that Reagan had challenged Gorbachev on were now unleashing forces that not even Gorbachev could control. The first cracks appeared in May 1989 when Hungary started taking down the fence on its border with Austria. That summer, during a pan-European picnic on that same border, the gates were opened for 3 hours. Hundreds of East Germans who were there as tourists seized the moment and fled west. It started as a trickle, but it soon became a flood. Back in East Germany, the people found their courage. Peaceful weekly protests in the city of Leipzig grew from hundreds to hundreds of thousands, all chanting, "Wir sind das Volk," "We are the people." By early November 1989, 500,000 people gathered in East Berlin to demand change. The communist government was collapsing. The final act came on the night of November 9, 1989, in a moment of almost comical chaos. At a press conference, a low-level party official named Günter Schabowski was handed a note about new travel rules. He hadn't been briefed on it. When reporters peppered him with questions, he got flustered and announced that East Germans were free to travel to the West. A reporter yelled, "When does that take effect?" Schabowski, shuffling his papers, stammered, "As far as I know, effective immediately without delay." The words spread like wildfire. Within minutes, thousands of East Berliners, in a state of hopeful disbelief, swarmed the checkpoints at the wall. The guards were stunned. They had no orders. As the crowds got bigger and louder, chanting, "Open the gate!" the guards had a choice: open fire on their own people or stand down. The commander at the Bornholmer Strasse crossing made the call. He ordered the gates opened. The dam broke. A wave of euphoric people poured through, met by cheering West Berliners. People climbed on top of the wall, dancing, crying, and embracing strangers. Armed with hammers and chisels, they started physically tearing down the symbol of their oppression, becoming known as wall peckers. The scar was finally being healed, not by a politician, but by the people themselves. In the years after the wall fell, Reagan's speech was seen in a new light. It wasn't a gaffe. It was a moment of incredible foresight. It showed his core conviction that the Cold War wasn't just about military power, but a battle of ideas. He saw the Berlin Wall for what it was, not just concrete and wire, but the physical proof of a failed and brutal ideology. By demanding its removal, he wasn't just talking about a structure. He was calling for an end to the world it represented. The speech didn't single-handedly bring down the wall, but it perfectly captured the moment, gave voice to the hopes of millions, and made it clear to the world which way history was turning. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes courage, clarity, and a simple, unwavering demand for freedom can, in the end, bring down the mightiest of walls. What other speeches do you think have changed history? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories about the moments that shaped our world, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Thanks for watching.